She was beautiful, and I was trying to be friendly. There's no altruism here. I was being friendly, and it was because she was beautiful. I had walked through the serving line at the cafeteria, and I was having an internal debate as to exactly what constituted shepherd's pie. Now, there were lots of nutritional conundrums in the Heritage Cafeteria. For instance, sometimes they served this thing that we called mystery meat. The mystery was not into what kind of meat it was, but was it indeed meat? There was the bird parts that they served, way too big to be a chicken, but not quite large enough to be an ostrich or an emu. Maybe they'd found a really good deal on buzzard. Thus the questions concerning shepherd's pie. Was this indeed the sustenance of nomadic pastoral professionals, the things that shepherds eat, or was it made from dead sheep herders, thus calling it shepherd's pie? I sat down across from the beautiful girl at one of the long tables. Now, there were other people at the table. There were people I knew, so I wasn't being overly intrusive or overtly intrusive, and I wasn't quite being stalkery. And as I sat there negotiating my shepherd's pie, still struggling with the question, was I eating the staple nourishment of that noble profession, or was I eating one of those noble professionals? I noticed the brace on her hand. It was flesh-colored. It started at her wrist and spanned out over the back of her hand like a spider's web, and it connected to each of her long, delicate fingers. Obviously, it was a strengthening or a rehabilitation or retraining device. She must have gotten hurt on Christmas break. It was just after Christmas, and we'd all been home, and we'd all returned to campus. Christmas break for me was always a wonderful experience. I lived in a dorm room that was small enough I could touch with both hands, and to return to the little home on Williamson Street in Oxford, Alabama, even for the briefest moments, was always a good thing. I spent 2 or 3 weeks at home, and I'd been with my brother. I'd been with my mom and dad. I'd been climbing at Steele. We had gone over to Cheahaw Mountain, and I just assumed everybody's visit home was wonderful. I was wrong. In an attempt to make conversation, I asked, "So, what happened to the wing?" I did not have a right to ask, and I know this now. I was being intrusive. She responded, "I was unloading the dishwasher, and a glass shattered in my hand." My mind blissfully accepted the fact that a glass superheated in a dishwasher could be fragile, and I never gave it much thought until later. I enjoyed college life. I was 8 hours away from home. I didn't have much money, but I ate in the cafeteria, and I had a little dorm room to sleep in. Without the cafeteria card in the dorm room, I would have essentially been homeless. I've mentioned before that my friend Gail Richardson says Jonesy lived like a savage when he was in school, but I didn't know any better. They let me play defensive end for a club. I was preaching on some of the weekends. I was studying art as my minor. I was getting to draw and pretend I was in college. There was a park with a place to climb and rappel less than 15 minutes from campus. It was a super simple, good life. I was making a new set of friends, and for the first time in my life, they were not just friends, but they were peers. I wasn't a leader. I was being led. I was not a chief. We were all equals, and I was being made into a better person. I was being made into a better man, and not just because of the course of study at the university, but because of these people I was hanging out with, because of these associations. I wouldn't say I was popular on campus, but I was at least well known. The Student Government Association had asked me to be the spiritual life director. And as the spiritual life director, I often spoke at the campus-wide devotionals, and I even got to speak in chapel once in a while. And in spite of real difficulties, academically and financially, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what was wrong, but rather on what was right in my very simple, unsophisticated world. So I'm sitting here in my blissful happiness at a table full of people, and some of them are beautiful, and I continue this conversation. And as I continue talking to other people at the table and then interacting with the girl with the wounded hand. As the conversation continued, I began to get the distinct cool impression that my attempts to be clever, charming, or debonair were not appreciated, and they were not the things that the girl with the wound wanted to hear. And I don't remember how the conversation degraded. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember was it appropriate or inappropriate, and I don't recall verbatim what she said in response. But I said something, and then it was either taken as being cavalier or glib or nonchalant. But the impact of what she said basically was I was too stupid or naive to see the real world. And I should not believe that everyone I met was as stupidly happy as I was. And suddenly, I could see through my 18-year-old eyes that she was way more weary than she was beautiful. And her eyes were the oldest pair of eyes I'd ever seen in a human up to that point in my life. I have since come to the conclusion that those thin, delicate fingers would never have possessed enough strength or power to crush a glass, no matter how hot it got in the dishwasher. My family didn't own a dishwasher, so I'd taken her word for it. And then her long sleeves made sense. I'd seen her on campus here and there. I'd never got a chance to sit across the table from her, but I can't recall having ever seen her arms. And if you had been able to push her sleeves up, I believe that her forearms would have contained very deep, angry, newly healed scars. I believe and will believe that the apparatus she wore on her hand was because the connecting things in her fingers, her ligaments, and her tendons had been severed. And they'd been severed in an attempt to kill herself. I don't know if she hated herself or just hated her life. And I don't know where the hate came from. Maybe it was because she was suffering or had been made to suffer. But she felt resentful because I was neither angry nor afraid and was ignorant, at least in her mind, about her suffering. And probably she thought I was ignorant about suffering in general. I had gone home to friends and family and had adventures and climbed and saw old friends. On her trip back home, she decided not to come back to school. Maybe she decided that before she left campus, or maybe she'd gotten home hoping to have a good visit, and things had occurred that were so unbearable and so horrible during her visit that she decided she was going to end her visit to this planet. Most likely she'd spent quite a bit of her home break at the hospital, and maybe even in a psychiatric bed at the hospital. I was 18 years old, and I knew that everybody didn't live in the world I lived in, or at least they didn't see it, perceive it, or experience it the way I did. I knew this, but I didn't understand it. Again, intellectually, I had always been aware of hurting people, but I thought hurt, disappointment, tragedy, grief, or loss, I thought that was a thing one experienced and then moved back into normal. I have since learned that being hurt is sometimes the norm for some people. And I really don't know what was so bad in her life. And it really doesn't matter how I evaluate it. I don't get to choose what's hurtful for you. I don't get to choose what's scary for you. I don't get to choose what's traumatic for you. She had concluded it was bad. And at some point in her visit at home had concluded it was bad enough that she didn't want to do any of it anymore. And I don't know if she really wanted to die or if she just really wanted to quit hurting. I couldn't conceive how someone so pretty had any reason to be unhappy at all, but I do know now that happiness is not about what you look like. And happiness is not about what you have. And happiness is not about what you don't have. I have no idea what her life was like. I have no clue as to her hurts, the failings, the wounds, the disappointments, the fears, the losses, the traumas. All I know is that there was something there that I had never experienced, or at least I had not responded to a similar experience the same way she did. I knew, but did not understand, that home for the holidays does not mean the same thing to everyone. Family does not mean the same thing for everyone. Everyone does not feel safe. Everyone does not feel loved. Life is not the same for everyone. And hurt people often hurt other people. And hurt people often hurt themselves. At 18, I knew these things but did not understand them. And at 18, I did not have the knowledge or the skills to treat, to minister, nor to heal the girl with the wounds. And her wound, her hurt, went way beyond her hand. And her anger was not just limited to her life and to a boy trying to flirt with her at a table in a cafeteria. And I'm not saying she wasn't right. And I'm not saying she didn't have a right to feel that way about her life. And I'm not saying she didn't have the right to feel that way about me. What I am saying is she had a choice. And I don't want you to think that I think this is easy. And I don't want you to think this is something that one can just decide to do. But to assume that I am happy and everyone else is or should be might be a grievous error and might be deserving of contempt, bitterness, and hatred. And I get that in her mind I was guilty of such an offense. However, she was not alone in being hurt. And if she believed she was the only hurt person or the only person who hurt at that table, she would have been very, very wrong. Had she talked with the boy trying to flirt with her or anyone else at the table, the people at the table that she assumed had a better life and were just stupidly happy and therefore gave her the right to resent them, if she just talked to any of us, if she just listened to any of us, she might have discovered she was not the only hurt person sitting at the table. She was not the only hurt person in the room. And she was not the only person on campus who hurt. And she was not unique in her suffering. To assume that I am the only one with pain, to assume that I'm the only one with trouble or trauma and that my suffering is unique, and that those who are happy, successful, or fulfilled are merely happy because they are sheltered, privileged, inoculated, or uninitiated to suffering is not only unfortunate, but it is erroneous and insulting to the others who hurt and are hurt. We get to choose how we navigate the pain. True happiness is in spite of, not because of the wounds. True happiness, contentment, success, fulfillment, healing, or coping has less to do with what happens to us and more to do with how we choose to respond to what happens to us. We do get to choose. And sometimes it takes deliberate discipline to come to that choice. But we can live our lives in response to unfortunate or regrettable circumstances, or we can live our lives in response to our failings. We can live our lives in response to failings that are ours or the failings of others. We can live our lives in response to being wounded. We can live our lives in response to bearing scars, self-inflicted or otherwise. We can live our lives as a response to these things, and the response that we choose to live, that response will cause people to ask us all the time, continually, hey, how did you get hurt? Or that response will cause people who know that we have been hurt to ask us where we found the strength, the resources of the resolve to live with the hurts and the wounds rather than living lives where we choose to always live wounded and hurt.